You are sitting in a waiting room. It doesn't look like a hospital. It looks like a private members club, with quiet music and a glass of water on a side table. Outside this building, people are still tapping at their phones, trying to remember a name, a date, a password. Inside, you are about to forget what that struggle even feels like. In a few minutes, a surgeon is going to open a small section of your skull. Not because you are sick, because you can afford not to be limited anymore. This is not science fiction. This is already happening in early form right now. Companies like Neuralink have implanted devices into human brains, threading thousands of hair-thin electrodes into neural tissue to read and write electrical signals. Decode that for a second. Your thoughts are electricity. Every memory, every decision, every flicker of attention is a tiny voltage moving between neurons. A brain implant doesn't need magic. It just needs to listen to that electricity, and eventually to talk back to it. Right now, this technology exists mostly to help people who have lost basic function. Paralysis, blindness, loss of speech. Researchers at Stanford and Brown, through a long-running collaboration called BrainGate, have spent almost 2 decades proving that electrodes in the brain's motor cortex can let a paralyzed person move a robotic arm with thought alone. That is the medical case. That is the case everyone agrees on. But what happens when the same hardware stops being about restoring function and starts being about exceeding it? Picture the inequality math. A surgery like this costs, conservatively, hundreds of thousands of dollars today, and that's before maintenance, software, and upgrades. Now picture 2 children born in the same year. One has access to that surgery. One does not. By age 10, one child's working memory is being quietly extended by an external chip. The other is using a notebook. By age 20, one is fluent in 3 languages with almost no study time, because the device feeds vocabulary directly into the language centers of the brain while they sleep. The other is still doing flashcards. This isn't a hypothetical leap. Ray Kurzweil, the inventor and futurist who has spent decades predicting timelines for human-machine convergence, has long argued that direct neural connection to computing power is the natural next step after smartphones. Not a separate device in your hand, but an extension of the brain itself. Geoffrey Hinton, one of the researchers whose work made modern AI possible, has warned in recent years that we are building intelligence we don't fully understand, let alone intelligence we plan to merge with our own skulls. 2 very different men. 2 very different warnings. Same underlying question. What happens to a species when its smartest tool is no longer external? Let's walk through the first day of this future, the way it would actually feel. You wake up, and there's no grogginess, because the implant regulated your sleep cycle overnight, nudging you out of deep sleep at the optimal moment. You don't reach for your phone, because notifications already arrived as gentle thoughts, sorted by priority the way an assistant would have once sorted your mail. At work, you don't take notes because everything said in the meeting is already indexed in your memory, searchable the way you'd search a hard drive. Someone less fortunate, sitting beside you, is still scribbling in a notebook, hoping their handwriting is fast enough to keep up. Here is the part most people miss. The advantage isn't really intelligence. It's bandwidth. Your brain has always been intelligent. It has just been bottlenecked, limited by how fast you can read, type, and speak, which is painfully slow compared to how fast a chip can move data. Neuroscientists studying brain-computer interfaces, including teams who have published in the journal Nature, have shown that the limiting factor in most of these systems isn't the brain's capacity to think. It's the speed of the interface translating that thought into output. Solve the interface and you don't make someone smarter in some abstract sense. You remove the traffic jam between thinking and doing. Now scale that bottleneck removal across an entire economic class. A surgeon with this kind of bandwidth doesn't get tired reviewing scans, because the implant pre-filters obvious cases before they even reach conscious attention. A lawyer with this kind of bandwidth doesn't read case law. They query it the way you'd ask a search engine, except the search engine is wired directly into their reasoning. A trader doesn't watch markets. The implant flags anomalies before a human eye could register the pattern. Each of these people isn't competing with other professionals anymore. They're competing with a baseline of human cognition that no longer applies to them. This is where it gets uncomfortable because the gap doesn't stay still. It compounds. Think about how a small head start becomes a canyon over time. A student who reads twice as fast accumulates twice the knowledge per year, which means by graduation they've absorbed roughly a decade more material than an unaugmented peer, simply from time-on-task efficiency, not raw intelligence. Stretch that compounding effect across a 40-year career, and the unaugmented worker isn't behind by a few years of experience anymore. They are behind by an entire alternate version of their own life, one they never got the chance to live, because the tool that would have unlocked it was never inside their financial reach. Demis Hassabis, who leads DeepMind, has spoken about artificial intelligence as something that should expand human potential broadly, framed as a tool for everyone rather than a privilege for a few. That is the stated hope of much of the AI research world. But hope is not policy, and history offers a blunt counterexample. The personal computer, the smartphone, even electricity itself, all began as luxuries before they became commodities, and the gap during that transition period was where entire generations of opportunity were quietly won or lost. So here's the paradox almost nobody talks about, the one that flips the usual fear on its head. The danger isn't that the rich will become smarter than everyone else. Intelligence was never evenly distributed to begin with. Some people have always outthought others, with or without a chip. The real danger is narrower and stranger. The rich won't just think faster, they'll think differently, in categories the rest of humanity won't share. Imagine a decision-making process partly shaped by an AI system woven directly into perception, where the line between your idea and the machine's suggestion simply dissolves, because there was never a clear boundary between the two in the first place. The wealthy don't just gain an advantage. They begin operating with a different relationship to their own thoughts, one the rest of the species can't access, observe, or even fully understand from the outside, because it isn't happening in any language or behavior we can see. It's happening silently, inside skin, inside skull, invisible to everyone who hasn't had the surgery. That's the quiet unease underneath the obvious one. Not that some people will be smarter. That some people will become cognitively foreign to the rest of us, while looking, dressing, and speaking exactly the same. And yet, step back far enough and something strange becomes visible. This has already happened before, just slower, and with less drama. The printing press didn't just spread information. It created, for the first time, a class of people whose thinking was shaped by access to written knowledge. That the majority of humans, who were illiterate, could never directly perceive. Their reasoning, their categories, their internal world, were quietly being rewired by a tool the rest of the species didn't have. We don't call that a brain implant. We call it literacy. But functionally, it was the same kind of cognitive divide, just stretched across centuries instead of years, giving society time to slowly close the gap. The unsettling question for this new wave of brain technology isn't whether the gap will appear. Gaps like this always appear first. It's whether this one will close in years, the way smartphones eventually did, or calcify into something permanent, because unlike a phone, you can't simply hand a brain implant to someone who couldn't otherwise afford one, and you can't easily reverse decades of compounded cognitive advantage once it has already happened. So picture that waiting room again. the quiet music, the glass of water, the people outside on their phones, still trying to remember a name. Except now you realize something. You are not watching a future scene. You are watching a slower version of something already underway, happening in tutoring services, elite schools, advanced software, and yes, the very first human trials of neural implants happening in hospitals today. The surgery hasn't become common yet. But the underlying story, the one where access to cognitive enhancement quietly tracks the size of someone's bank account, isn't waiting for the future to begin. It already has.